So in order for us to talk about inner resilience, it's probably good for me to at least give some kind of definition of what it is. This is the definition that I like. Um, it doesn't have to be exactly like this for you, but this is something that I really resonated with. So Daniel Christian Wall says that inner resilience is about the capacity to face the horrors and misery of the world square on, rather than trying to ignore them. But it's also about seeing the beauty, the collaboration, the compassion, the care, and the love that is all around us. And so this topic of inner resilience is something that I've been thinking about and reading about and working with people on, particularly in relationship to the climate crisis over the last few years. And there are a number of kind of thought leaders and researchers that I've been following in terms of their work and what it means to build inner resilience. And so I wanted to share just a few of the frameworks with you here. So here we see something called Fisher's process of transition. And this kind of highlights the process for individuals in dealing with any sort of big change. So it's not specifically a climate model, but what I wanted to show specifically is that you can see that a necessary part of the process is to go through those unpleasant feelings like fear, guilt, anger, rage. And as you can also see by the different colors of the paths, there are many different paths that we can take depending on how ready we are to accept that change is necessary. But if we are feeling prepared and ready to move through some of these difficult feelings and into that gradual acceptance into a new future for ourselves, that's when we can really start to feel better and move upward on the curve, working toward this new future. A more recent example that came out, I think, last year is it does specifically relate to climate change, and it's from the academic scholar Panu Pitala, who describes the process of how we cope and how we live with ecological crisis. And so first, it often comes with this awakening, this really big shock to our system, which can often lead into this like really strong anxiety, really profound depression. And then as we try to resolve this, there's kind of three main things that we do. First is we take action. We try to feel better through action, and that works to a certain degree. We also participate in some form of emotional engagement, including, grieving the things that we're losing. And we also do distancing. So that is kind of taking ourselves away from the problem. And that could be through both what he calls kind of self-care and avoidance. So I think what he's getting at there is sometimes taking ourselves away from the issue is healthy. If you don't necessarily need to be doom scrolling every hour of the day on the news to know that the climate crisis is really severe. And so there's kind of a fine line between avoiding the problem and healthily distancing ourselves from the problem. And as we continue to take these three actions, we move into this kind of the rightermost curve, which is our ability to kind of just live with the ecological crisis. So we've kind of coped through that transition process, and now we're in this state of we're kind of just continuing to do these things and living in this ecological crisis. And then I also wanted to share this framework, which is the work that reconnects. Some of you may have heard of this. I love this framework. It is based on some work by Joanna Macy. And this is a process of transition. So in this spiral, we start our journey with thinking about gratitude. So being aware of the abundance that we have in the here and now. And then we move into honoring our grief, honoring our distress, honoring our pain for the world. And once we take the time to really do that, we can start to see with new eyes. So we can start to see new perspectives that maybe might be a little more supportive to us as we navigate this mess. And once we see those new perspectives, we can then go forth and start to take action on the things that really matter to us. And this process, as you can see by the spiral on the far right, it doesn't just happen once. It happens over and over and over again. But each time it happens, we feel a little bit more equipped and a little bit better off. So we are slowly starting to kind of come up and above and get better, I suppose. So with all of that said, I have been like really fascinated by all of these different types of frameworks. And this was the thing that kind of really got me interested, in addition to some of the work that I've been doing at Carbon Conversations, to become a climate coach and a facilitator. And so I've worked with clients and explored some of these concepts with them. And I created this framework as a useful way to highlight how more specifically someone can work toward building inner resilience in their life. So my thinking on this framework is definitely still emerging. So it's kind of like a sneak peek that you're getting at this. But so far, I'm getting some good feedback on this, and I'm finding it useful to talk about inner resilience in this specific way. So I'd like to share with you 5 kind of keys to building inner resilience, which are root, attune, imagine, connect, and act. So let's get into it. So at the foundation, we have root. So I'd like for you to imagine for a moment that you are a tree being planted in this new ecosystem of climate action. One of the first things that is going to need to happen for you to have a chance at surviving and thriving is that you need to take root into the ground. This is something that stabilizes you, it anchors you, it allows you to take in all the nutrients and energy that you need so that you can thrive. And to me, understanding your values and motivations and constantly reminding yourself of them is like that rooting process of rooting yourself into the ground. And so I won't get too much into this because the exercise that we're doing later is going to be doing this directly. Next is connect. So connected to the roots of trees are a thread-like fungi called mycelium. And this is what enables trees to communicate with each other, support each other with nutrients, so that it's not just the individual trees that are taking care of themselves, but the entire ecosystem is working together and supporting the entire ecosystem to thrive. And so Suzanne Simard, who is a forest ecologist at UBC, calls this the wood wide web, which I think is pretty cute and clever. So we are not unlike these forest ecosystems. As this quote from Adrienne Maree Brown says, species only survive if they learn to be in community. So building inner resilience also means practicing this sense of reciprocity, giving back to both your human and your non-human community, and also asking for help and accepting support from others when you need it. And this can be difficult. I know that our society has been taught that being vulnerable is maybe being weak. Yet I really believe that this vulnerability is the only way that we can build trust. It's the only way that we can build meaningful connection with others. So I invite you to reflect on what might reciprocity and vulnerability look like for yourself and in your community. Okay, next we have attune. And we're going to continue with the tree metaphor because trees are great. But it's important to be attuned to how the conditions outside yourself are going to affect your own needs and your own boundaries. And it's important for yourself to re-regulate when you can. So a study came out in, I think it was the late 2000s, saying that trees actually photosynthesize most efficiently at 70 degrees Fahrenheit. And so regardless of what the ambient air temperature is outside, the trees can actually control their leaf temperature to as close to 70 degrees as possible. And that's true even in northern latitudes. So they do this through what the scientists said is they do this through clever little physical tricks. I think like just having their leaves really close together is one example. So the wind doesn't take as much of the heat. And so similarly, we must also attune, or it's important for us to attune to when we're not feeling comfortable, when we're not able to be our most effective selves, maybe because we're experiencing mental discomfort or physical discomfort. And we take the time to listen to our bodies. I know that that's difficult sometimes, and myself is included in this. We have busy schedules, and so that means that it's very easy to ignore some of the physical symptoms that we have in terms of us being uncomfortable. And so attuning can really just be as simple as taking some time to slow down, to check in with yourself, and to actually practice naming what you're feeling in this moment. Very similar to the couple of minutes we took at the beginning of this session. Okay, next is imagine. So what actually is it that allows trees to take up so much energy? Well, one thing that I think is very important is that trees and plants are able to shift toward the sunlight. And they're able to move toward where that energy is. And this means that sometimes they grow and they move flexibly and they stretch themselves. And they do so in very unexpected and often kind of interestingly creative ways to reach that light. So to me, I really see that kind of reaching for that light and reaching for that energy is our ability to imagine. Because we humans, as we so found in that paperclip exercise, we're very creative, we're a very intelligent species, and we can be extra creative in difficult times. And what allows us to be extra creative is if we can use our imaginations to really visualize, well, what is it the type of world that we want to live in? And some of the questions that I invite you to reflect on, maybe we can even talk about it after our session if we have some time and if there's interest. But questions like, what would be unacceptable in this new society in which I want to live and be in? What are some of the things that we're inviting into this new society that don't exist? And what are the qualities and attributes that we personally are going to bring to the table here? And when we have this vision, it's almost like we have something to stretch toward. We have something that we can latch onto and start to move toward. And then finally, we have action. I should have had my logo on here, but I don't. But it's because my logo is a maple key. And so I wanted to bring connection into that because when we think about a maple tree, well, what are the actions that it takes? Well, either in the spring or the fall, depending on the species, maple trees, they drop their seeds, which are those little maple keys or those helicopter looking things. And these seeds kind of start to come down, they fly, they spread, they move with the wind, and they are brought to the ground. Some of them are eaten by squirrels and other animals. And really, ultimately, only a very small percentage of these keys actually end up rooting to form new trees. But going back to this kind of picturing ourselves as the tree, does it really matter to that tree that only a small percentage actually turn into other trees? It doesn't, right? If trees could speak the language that we speak, I don't think that we'd hear a tree say something like, well, I think it's pretty likely that most of my seeds are just going to end up getting into the city's compost. So there's really no point in letting my seeds fall. It's kind of a silly analogy, but I just, I can't really imagine any kind of tree doing something like that because, they act not because they depend on something to happen with those little actions and those seeds. They just kind of sprinkle them all everywhere. And then eventually some of them end up rooting into bigger things. And so it gives us the courage to ask ourselves, well, what can we take away from this example, this thought, when it comes to our own response on climate change? And how can we be more like trees and just say, you know what, regardless of the situation, I'm going to continue to contribute to the fullest extent that I can and sprinkle my small actions everywhere and know that and trust that, some will spring up into bigger things. Yes, hard to imagine a doomer tree for sure. Not to say that our doomer feelings are not valid, because they absolutely are. And I don't want to dismiss anyone who's feeling that way, but I won't say any more about that. And so I'm glad that you're enjoying the tree analogies. That's great. And so this is kind of the framework again, just so you can see it again.